11:30.
Perfect.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Friday Reporter podcast. Today's guest is, well, a friend and a colleague that I've worked with now for some time. Kailey Leinz is with Bloomberg News. She is the host of Balance of Power in the evenings, and also is doing now. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it was on. It was Sound On, but now it's Balance of Power during the day.
Yes, the early edition.
The early edition. All right. So, Kailey, thanks so much for being with me. I'm thrilled to pieces to have you. I know I've been promising for so long that I was going to get you on, but you're so busy. It's hard to catch you.
That's Washington, but thank you
Breaking
for
news
having me.
all the time.
It never ends.
So, tell me a little bit about your background. Tell me a little bit how you got started and how you came to be in this amazing spot at Bloomberg.
It really started in high school. I had been a ballerina my whole life and thought that is what I was going to do with my life until my body couldn't do it anymore. And then in high school, I started writing for the school newspaper, absolutely loved my journalism teacher. And then she launched a broadcast program. So I had the morning brew every day at Lake Braddock Secondary School, and realized that that was a way to blend journalism, which I had this newfound passion for, also with kind of a more performance-oriented aspect.
Mhm.
Figured out that I really liked it, and then ultimately ended up at UVA. Was doing all of that extracurricularly since they didn't have a actual journalism school, and
Okay.
I ended up reporting at NBC 29, which was a local affiliate in Charlottesville, for a summer live on air. I
Fun.
was 19 years old. I couldn't believe that it was happening, but I realized pretty quickly that local news wasn't really for me. And one of my professors, who I was really close with, suggested Bloomberg when I was considering what to do after graduation. And I had like the worst grade I'd ever gotten in my life was macroeconomics. I was not a finance person, could
Yeah.
not believe that was something he thought that I should do, but I went for it, ended up interning there, and I've been here now 7 years, haven't
Wow.
left.
That's so
Started
awesome.
with markets focused reporting actually on Bloomberg News side, rotated into the TV program after about 6 months, and have been with TV ever since. And it was in February of 2023 that I moved from New York to Washington, and it's just been a wild ride ever since.
Oh, so you started in the New York bureau.
I did. I was there for
Oh,
5.5 years before I
oh, so that
moved.
makes sense. So even though maybe this wasn't your first choice in coverage of business and economics in general, I've seen you do it and it's flawless. And so like, thank you for revealing that secret about you. But I think also too, like I think you've risen to the occasion. But now so when I first met you, you were typically you were breaking news, you were reporting from Capitol Hill, you were doing some really remarkable stand-up work, or you would come in and deliver some either news about economic news or political news, and really broke down the numbers in a way. And now you are the co-host for the TV show during the day, but you also host the radio show with Joe.
Yeah.
Talk to me. I mean, that's a lot of reporting during the day. And you're also reporting other things too. Tell me a little about what that cadence is like for you, because that's a really long day of a lot of on air. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about what the typical day looks like for you.
Well, it used to be before I started doing both of these shows, the 2 hours every single day. When I first got here, I was spending a lot of time on the Hill, running around, literally chasing people down. My
Yeah,
apologies to Jamie Dimon, who has been the subject of me physically running after him a few times. Um, and so that would just be you're kind of going all day, rush back to the bureau, get what you can on air, try to catch your breath while doing it. Um, because it is a lot of, you have to be read in on so much to be able to talk about so many different things, how policy is actually impacting markets, especially for us here at Bloomberg. It's not just about the politics, it is about the policy and the impact of that policy. So a certain amount of kind of analysis and research has to be done as well, in addition to the conversations you were having with lawmakers or whoever. And a day now that I'm doing both of those shows, it's a lot of reading. Um, our first show is all ad-libbed. The radio on TV program, we have no scripts or anything, so it's all just off the cuff. You just have to know your stuff and be confident in talking about it. So
really.
a lot of reading and research, a lot of aggregating the conversations you have had on and off air that you
Sure.
can call back to. And then you just have to keep the energy up through 6 p.m. when you're off air for the second hour. So a lot of it is, make sure to hydrate and energize as well.
Yeah, but also too, like there's always so much breaking news in between. I
There
mean,
is.
because I'll follow you guys during the day, and then I'll see the evolution of change that comes. I mean, luckily, a lot of what happens in midday informs your conversation in the evening
It
because balance
does.
of power and in the end of the day is really a readout on what's happened and why it's going to affect markets and everything else for the following day. And so that I think is really good. But it's not like you can go find a small room to maybe close your eyes for 15 minutes. You really have to stay moving all day long. It's a tremendous amount of work, I know.
Yeah, it would be nice to have the luxury of a break now and then, but I actually think, at least for me personally, I operate much better on breaking news, having not too much time to sit with something, being able to just kind of take the adrenaline you're feeling when things are coming through, be analyzing it in real time. That I think is where I get a lot of energy from, or in those kind of situations. But you have to do so much work to be prepared for when news like that ultimately comes. You have to know the context around it when things are flying in from left and right. I was on air just recently when a motion to vacate was called by Marjorie Taylor Greene, which all of us thought wasn't going to be happening anymore.
Yeah.
She surprised us all with it. Luckily, we had talked enough about it at that point that you can handle it as it comes in. But with Bloomberg, especially in breaking news situations, we always try to focus on being right rather than being first, and making sure that what you are saying in an information when you're getting information in real time, that you're reporting it accurately, that you're not jumping to any conclusions too soon. And so that's always the trickiest stance with the breaking news, is that you want to be able to bring the news to the audience as fast as you can, but you also want to make sure whatever it is you're telling them is accurate, not misleading in any way. And Bloomberg being so, we try to play it down the middle. We are very fact and data oriented.
Yeah.
We always want to be right.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say is that you also have a very different cadence throughout the day in terms of programming, very different from every other news outlet in Washington, D.C. A lot of times you'll see, and this is not a knock, it's just everybody has a different personality, if you will. Um, other stations tend to regurgitate the same story throughout the day as it evolves and changes, and sometimes that can get a little stale over time. It seems to me like you try to distill some of what's happening in the markets, some of what's happening in global political worlds, and then what's happening sort of politically here in the US. And that to me, and it changes over time, and each and every hour on Bloomberg is something very different. And that I think is very cool because you have your audience is really quite a bit different than a lot of the other networks in town.
Yeah, especially because we do obviously have that finance bent, and there is a trading day ongoing for that, at
Absolutely.
least those first hours in which we're on air. So yes, you want to be bringing the politics and the policy, but how does it impact what's currently happening in financial markets, considering those are active and moving in real time as you're on air? In the 5 p.m. hour, once markets are closed, that's a much easier way to kind of sit back, take the 5,000-foot view, talk more about the kind of politics and human beings, and get into some of those longer kind of conversations, versus in the
For sure.
market things are moving fast. And I think one thing that I really like about being in more financial and business journalism while focusing on politics is that there's always so many implications for any policy decision. If you're talking about, say, something related to China, certainly there's the geopolitical aspect, what it means for a relationship between two countries, what it means domestically, what is that decision trying to cater to in terms of a union or an industry that a president or presidential candidate might be trying to make sure they secure the vote from. But then also, what does it actually mean for business? If we're talking about something like tariffs, what companies could be affected? What is it likely to do for inflation? There's so many different angles that you can take with it. And
Mhm.
it's a way for us to be, hitting the news and hitting things that are happening in real time, but making sure that we do it with nuance and it's not just repetitive over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and the way I think you do that so well, at least in my own um, observation, is that you really do a good job of bringing in some really remarkable guests too. I mean, I'm lucky enough to every once in a while get a window into that process because occasionally I will sit with you and do the political panel. But what's especially interesting to me is that I'll tune in and you'll have Jamie Dimon, or you'll have a member. Can I pause for a second? I need to go kill my dogs. Hang on one second. Just give me one second. I'm gonna write down what time this is. 9:42. Hang on one sec.
Okay.
Hey, you two guys cut it out. My husband is not home because he's playing golf, and they have decided to bark at every car go by. So I think I've been
I know how that goes.
I know you do. Thank you for understanding, but that would be really rude in your our conversation. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. So the one thing I've had a chance to observe during the time that I've been sort of witness to the show and how the show comes together is that you have some really remarkable guests. I mean, the other day, Charlie Cook and Jane Harmon, and it's a rotating cast of some of the biggest names in Washington D.C. and all across the globe. And that to me, I think, is what really encourages a lot of really good conversation, but also too, what always strikes me about your conversations with these people is that you don't pull a punch. And I mean this, and I don't mean this I mean this in like the biggest complimentary way. These are some of the biggest names, and you ask some really tough questions of them, and it's so impressive. And they take it and they answer it well. But it's one of those things that I think I might be intimidated by some of these names that come on these shows, and I feel like you handle it with such grace. How much preparation time, like how much room do you have to move? How soon in advance do you know that these superstars are coming on your show?
Sometimes we have more notice than others. Oftentimes when it's a really big name, it's the matter of securing the 15 minutes that they have in a week-long window.
Okay.
And when they can do it, they can do it, and you just got to jump and run with it.
Yeah.
Other times we do have more advance notice, and obviously you want to do as much preparation as possible. But no matter who the guest is, I really always try to ask them the questions that I genuinely have.
Mm.
Which sometimes my husband, whenever he watches, is like, you can be harsh sometimes. And that's not intentional. It's just, I'm genuinely curious.
Uh-huh.
I don't understand this. Please help me understand. Or why would this be? Um, and I think that's really where the best conversations come from, because yes, it's an interview. You're trying to get news out of it, but an interview is really just a televised conversation.
For
And
sure.
it's a lot easier when someone is in person and you can still be, having more friendly interaction. They can pick up on your body language. You can talk to them beforehand and kind of establish a rapport. But sometimes when they're just talking to a camera, you're talking to a camera, you can't see each other. That's where it can get a little testier. But I think in general, people know what they're getting into. They're coming for an interview. They have an idea of things that they could be asked, especially if there's news that day. And I always think, everything's fair game,
Yeah.
and you can be
It doesn't
respectful.
come across as harsh. And this is the criticism we always get from our spouses. It always comes across as really thoughtful and courageous. And I don't mean that to be like, I'm not trying to go out of my way to compliment you. I just want you to know that like it
Thank
comes
you.
off as confident, but also like a willingness to ask some really big names, some really tough questions that I don't know. I think I might be a little bit intimidated by some of the big names that you all bring in. Um, to that point, though, is there something that stands out to you in the 7 years that you've been with Bloomberg that you're especially proud of? Or, I mean, chasing Jamie Dimon down is a pretty big deal, but there's so many other examples I can think of. Like, is there anything that sort of stands out to you as something you're especially excited to talk about?
Well, we've done some pretty big interviews, especially around the 2024 election cycle. One interview in particular that I was proud of when we were in New Hampshire covering the Republican primary, we had the governor, Chris Sununu, join us in our facility there in Manchester. And we had an extensive conversation. It was something like 20 minutes long. And he was obviously at that time an endorser of Nikki Haley, one of her most powerful surrogates. He was all in for her, yet maintained that if Trump ended up the nominee, that's who he was going to support. And in this conversation, he had said that he didn't think Trump was emblematic of Republican values, that he did not hold these things. And I just could not understand why, if that was true, you still are willing to support him as a quote unquote Republican when you don't think he is reflective of a quote unquote Republican. And we went back and forth for several minutes just trying to dig out that point. But it was an interview that was pretty successful, got a lot of pickup. And it was just an example, I think, of really trying to hold someone to account. If this is your view, you need to be able to defend it and explain it to other people. So that was one in particular, a higher profile, obviously a very powerful, very well-liked governor.
Yeah.
It was my first time meeting him. We were in person on his turf, essentially. But that was one I was proud of. And then the other thing of just not being afraid to throw yourself out there and ask the question. When I was still almost brand new to Washington, I had been here like 2 months. It was during the debt ceiling fight. And everyone just wanted to hear from the then speaker, Kevin McCarthy. And it was a Saturday morning. I'm out with my husband walking my dog. I see a bunch of people with earpieces in. And I was like, what principle are they protecting? So I start looking around, and Kevin McCarthy is just out for a morning walk. No one's noticed him, it seemed, at this point. And I was like, okay, well, I could snap a picture and be like, that was cool. I saw the House Speaker. And instead, I ran over and yelled at him, Mr. Speaker, how are debt ceiling talks going? And he gave me an answer. And that was the first time that weekend that anyone had gotten an update from Kevin McCarthy on the matter. It went like semi-viral in, political newsletter world. And so that was just a cool moment in that. Obviously, he was not sitting down for an interview with me, but I had an opportunity and I was going to seize it. And if you have to yell across the National Mall to get the speaker's attention, then you yell across the mall to get the speaker's attention.
Well, that's so cool. And I think that that's the one thing that people forget about Washington, D.C. is that as big a town as it feels like, it's actually quite small. So you could be out on a Saturday afternoon with your dog taking a walk and run into whoever. And there is, I definitely think, a line, and you took, obviously you took that's an appropriate question. If nothing was keeping that guy up, it was what was happening with the debt ceiling. I mean, I'm sure he thought about what his answer was going to be all day long anyway. But also too, like the cadence of this town is so cool and so different. And I know that because you spend so much time in your workday, are there other things like after the end of the day, like as you call it quits, 6 o'clock, you're on your way out the door, what kinds of things keep a journalist like yourself busy in the evening time?
Well, on a good day, I get to go home and recharge with the dog and eat dinner, which is a nice perk of being on a normal schedule, which I have not always been for my journalism career. Historically, I've been waking up at 2:33 in the morning. But something that's very different about Washington, to your point, is everyone's out and about. There's always events. And if you are going to make the connections and know the people that you need to know, you need to be out and about as well. So I try to limit myself to just 1 or 2 nights a week to actually do that kind of thing. But it is a lot of, going out and just socializing, see who you meet while you're out socializing, go to that random event that you don't actually know anyone who's going, but might as well go hand out some business cards and have a glass of wine on a Wednesday.
Sure.
So there's a lot of extracurricular activity that is still work oriented that happens in DC, as I'm sure you all know.
Yes.
And then it's a lot of just reading things that I wouldn't necessarily need to read during the day for like the news I knew I was covering, but reading other things, long form pieces that are an in-depth dive into something, watching, magazine style pieces like 60 Minutes that dig into a specific issue, because all of that, I never know when that could prove useful. So I always am also just reading things that interest me and see if they ever come up.
I'm so curious because so every journalist in this town has a very different approach to their own self-promotion. And I mean this kind of in more of a curious way. You're very careful and curated about the way that you share. And it's impressive. And as someone who is maybe a generation ahead of you, I'm always curious about what you think is the most useful platform for sharing maybe how your stories have evolved during the day, or sharing maybe like a unique experience. Like, how do you feel like, I know that Bloomberg plays a role in that, just as every other brand will, but how do you find yourself as you're sort of like, you're here in Washington, you have these 2 super successful shows. What platforms do you find are the most useful for you for advancing that conversation?
I think Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, which is a weird thing for a millennial to say, but I mean, everybody might not be on TikTok pretty soon. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we do a lot of Instagram reels of our content, and I always make sure that, it's usually our higher profile interviews, the kind of key soundbite that came out of that conversation. Always make sure that gets reposted to my public TV oriented Instagram. I also have a private personal Instagram because that is my personal life, and I try very hard to keep those things separated.
Smart. Yeah.
And so I kind of have this weird maintenance of 2 accounts, but that's just how I personally decided to do it, because I'm not interested in everybody knowing all of my business, but my work, absolutely. You can know all of my work. Please look at my work.
But I think that that's super smart. I think that especially if you're a public person like you are, where you are out and about and you see people and people know you, there are some things that you want to be shared and to
Yeah.
be known about you. And then there are other things that perhaps you'd like to share a photo of your dog with your family and have nobody other than your family know about that kind of thing. Like and that's so cool.
Um,
Okay, so because the Instagram reels are so good, but and tell me what else, because I know you're really good about this.
and X, Twitter,
Yeah,
formerly.
better. Yeah.
Um, I know that it can be a very toxic place to be
Mm,
receiving criticism of your
sure.
work and your content. At the same
Yeah,
time, to be completely frank, you have to be willing to open yourself up to that by having a presence there. But that is where a lot of people get news from, and a lot of journalists are on there, especially. So I think a lot of self promotion can come from that platform, because other journalists can sometimes cite what, if you're, detailing reporting, if I'm on the Hill during a big debate, someone just told me this, that might get cited elsewhere. I certainly do that with other journalists on X. I see something that Jake Sherman put out or something like that, and you can cite that reporting. And it's a good place to get information out very, very quickly.
for sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
Even though I tend to just try to avoid notifications sometimes, or use the
Yeah.
mute button strategically,
I
but
think that that's really smart. I mean, you have to protect yourself too, in the way that we've got so many different people are out there. This is their full-time project to make
yes.
other people feel terrible, and that's not cool at all. But I think you're right. I think X still, even though, like, so when I started the show 3 years ago, a lot of my first introductions, outside of the 50 reporters that I had on my list that I had worked with over the course of the last 20 years, I started to take a peek at, like, who was making some remarkable, offerings on Twitter
Mm,
about new and different points of view, not just about Capitol Hill, but about, like, I had Emily Hanford was on my show, and she talks about the changes in education over the course of our generation. And I asked her if she'd do the show on X, like through, I sent her a note. And that's kind of how found new and different conversations too that were happening in different places online.
yeah.
As much as it has changed and become a different thing now that it's X, because it's got a lot of other different contours, it is still an interesting place. But your Instagram is really good. Tell me again what the handle is so that people can follow you, because your reels are, I mean, it's impressive. I love how it's done for you.
Kailey Leinz .tv. And that is my real account. Something
I'm
else
gonna
that I contend with constantly, especially because I used to host a crypto show, and crypto bots are a very real thing.
Oh,
I have a lot of
interesting.
fake accounts out there circulating that are constantly flagged to me. So PSA, I will never DM you about any kind of crypto investment or encourage you to
Oh,
invest
goodness.
in
Oh, yeah.
anything. If you have
I got
questions,
Kaylee.
it's not from me.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. But also too, like, so I love that too, because not everybody gets to watch TV during the day. Not everybody gets to catch the show all the time. And so I feel like even though I don't always get to tune in from 5 to 6 or from 12 to 2 when you guys are on, um, I do love that I get to catch the news that you've made in the
Mm,
day. And so that's really cool. And so that's why I asked about that, because I think that that's something that people are trying to figure out, like, where are they going to make the biggest
yeah.
impact for themselves, but also too, like, if your audience didn't quite get to watch the show that day, what's the most important salient point that came out of your conversation with Chris Sununu? Or, what did Marjorie Taylor Greene do today? Even though nobody needs to know that ever. Um, I've revealed my true feelings about that. Okay, so cool. So, but you have to prepare all day long, you say. So, and there are
Mhm.
lots of things that you'll read. I'm sure that you're always on the terminal. That's the coolest thing ever.
It
Um, and I say that as somebody who watches how news is made and everything happens sort of in the Bloomberg space. You also work with some really cool and interesting people. Tell me a little bit about, there's the TV and there's
is.
radio and there's BGov. There's a lot of different factions inside the
Yeah.
Bloomberg newsroom. And I kind of just want you to unpack that for me a little bit so that the audience can understand that too. It is a true and amazing empire that is happening, not just in the Washington office, but also in the New York, everywhere that Bloomberg is.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the different brands, if you will, so we can
Yeah.
sort of understand that better.
Well, we have a very broad bench. It's 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. And I know that because I used to have to tag that when
I'm sure.
reading things every single day. But basically, you have the TV and radio department. They work pretty closely together, as evidenced by the fact that me and my co-host Joe Matthew host a radio TV show. It's on both platforms. There's a lot of work that we do that crosses those lines.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the more broadcast focused media channels. There is also Bloomberg Originals, which is some of our longer form pieces. That's more kind of documentary style. Emily Chang's new show, The Circuit, is on that platform. And then we have a podcast team as well, basically everything you could think of, any medium through which you can get news. Bloomberg probably has a pretty robust department. Then we're very fortunate, especially here in the Washington Bureau, we work incredibly closely with Bloomberg News, which is all of those written stories that you would see on the terminal or online. These are our beat reporters who are digging in, whereas as a TV anchor, I need to know at least a little about pretty much everything. These reporters know everything there is to know about something specific.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's such a great resource to be able to draw from. And we frequently use just Bloomberg print reporters on television. They're our best resource, frankly. That's something that not every news organization has access to, or at least broadcast organization has these people who are just such a wealth of knowledge that can just hop on over into the studio because they sit at the desk next to you and we're all kind of one team in that sense. Bloomberg
Mm.
government is kind of a separate entity. I honestly still have some confusion about the way that structurally works differently, but they work in conjunction, for example, with our Bloomberg News Congress team very closely. Bloomberg
Right.
government is a lot more industry specific. And again, you get that kind of specificity, like very specific knowledge about something or some area of policy, which is great. And then the other really cool thing about Bloomberg is we have Bloomberg Intelligence, which is actual
Mhm.
analysts who analyze specific companies or analyze litigation and likely outcomes, analyze likely policy outcomes. We have a lot of them here in DC who, whereas a reporter, it's not your job to have an opinion. Obviously, you can give us the information, but you can't
Sure.
really analyze it. You can't pontificate about it or really reveal your personal feelings. An analyst does have the ability to do that, right? They can say what they think more so. So it's great to be able to rely on those people as well. And certainly our clients are always looking at their research. So we have so many different areas to draw from, which is something I think makes Bloomberg incredibly unique because it's all under one roof and we have access
Yeah.
to all of it. And we're very lucky in that way.
It and that really that is the difference, right? Is that you have those tremendous resources that newsrooms used to have, where research could be done and people could be focused in on that. And I think that too, that sort of adds to the depth. And I have a lot of friends that are in that newsroom, many that I've known for years that have come and gone, many that have been there for many, many years. But it's a remarkable room full of some of the best journalists that I work with. So thank you for the unpacking of that, mostly for the audience, but also for me, because it's interesting how many contours there are and how many resources there are available, which makes it just really a tremendous resource for those who are consuming it like myself. Okay, so fun fact, you are not the first ballerina to be on this show.
Ah,
Larry Miller, who I don't know if you know Larry, but he's at USA 9. He's the broadcaster as well, was also a dancer.
okay.
He is not anymore, but I seriously think maybe we're going to start. This is the week of this is the month of seconds. I've had my second dual show. I've had my second ballerine. This is a lot's happening. This is all news. Super happy for me. But so as we get close to the end of our conversation, is there someone that you can think of in your world that would be a good guest for a future conversation?
Well, if you want to keep the ballerina theme going, someone I've known since literally childhood because we went to the same dance studio growing up, who is now a local reporter at the NBC affiliate here in Washington, Amy Cho. She does a lot of wonderful work. She also is a cancer survivor, and that's relatively recent. And I've just loved watching her career from afar in the way that she's blossomed. We interned actually at NBC the same
Oh, no
summer. I was at
way.
the network. She was at the local station, and she's been able to climb there in the same way that I've been very fortunate to kind of grow and blossom at Bloomberg, and doing it in a market like DC, which is a really big market. It's unusual to start
It
out
is.
in a market of this size when you're in the local news circuit, but she does an incredible job, and she just has a really amazing personal story.
It's such a cool market too. I will reach out to Amy. That's a fantastic recommendation. What's interesting to me too, and Larry and I know each other. The reason why I know all this is we go to the same gym, so he and I've been friends for forever. But it's interesting to be a local news reporter in a town that is full of news outlets that are
Yeah.
reporting on a variety of different things. So it's to me, it's always curious and interesting to know how it is they put together their day and how,
Mhm.
what is it they're going to report on? Are they going to report on the national news? Are they going to report on the local news? Are they going to report on whatever, sort of geopolitical something that's happening? It's remarkable to me. And there's so much for them to really cover in a very short window of time.
Yeah, and especially having done local news for the brief period that I did, where when you're at a network, you have the benefit of, having all of these producers and people who essentially do everything for you. They cut the sound. And in local news, it is so much self-driven. I mean, probably not the case in the DC market where there is more money and more resources, but a lot of these reporters are literally out there carrying their own equipment, shooting their own live shots, doing all of the literal grunt work themselves. And so it's not just about being a journalist, is about being a producer and a booker and an editor, and you're doing all of it simultaneously. And it's such important work because those stories need coverage just as much as any national news story does. And they work so hard, and I admire them so much.
Well, that explains to me, that background explains to me how you were so great when you were doing the on Capitol Hill stuff, because you were doing a lot of that yourself. You were putting yourself together on the hottest days, out on the stump, making sure you're tracking down whatever member of Congress it was that day and doing it all flawlessly. So it tells me that even though it was a short stint, it definitely informed how successful you've become now in the space that you are. Kailey, I can't believe it's been 30 minutes, but I am so, so pleased to have had the time with you. Thank you so much for being a guest, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you for having me.